We'll start the EDA meeting 6:15 right now with a call to order, which I am just doing, and roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Kaiser?
Here.
Commissioner LaRoche?
Here.
Commissioner Parsons?
Here.
Commissioner Adams?
Here.
Commissioner Banks? Commissioner Budashevsky?
Here.
Commissioner Cummings?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Now we're going to approval of minutes. Looking for a motion or a discussion on the minutes. John?
So moved.
Jim?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And motion passes. Now to item number 4, consider a resolution adopting a proposed 2022 EDA budget and HRA tax levy. John?
Great. Thank you, Madam President. Here's the slideshow, so we'll dive right in. This is our annual proposed budget and tax levy meeting for the EDA, and tonight, as the City Council, you'll be considering a similar resolution for the overall city budget, of which the EDA is a small part. So the HRA tax levy is what comprises most of the funding for the EDA's activities. In 2021, this year, it was $300,000. The staff is recommending a 2022 levy of $310,000, so a $10,000 increase, which is a 3.3% increase. It's important to note that state law actually allows a significantly higher HRA levy. It could be up to $441,000 in Crystal based on our market value. So our proposed levy is much lower than that. It's about $130,000 lower than the maximum allowed by the statute. The budget summary, as you can see, the budget is running in terms of revenues minus expenditures. It does show a modest deficit, but that is somewhat made up for whenever we are able to sell property, because that, of course, shows up as revenue in that year, but it's unpredictable. And so for that reason, as you see in past years, like last year in 2020, we basically broke even, which is good. In 2021, the adopted budget shows expenditures exceeding revenue, but we did have at least one property sale this year, which will reduce that gap somewhat, and we hope for the same thing in 2022. And you can see the fund balance still will be around $2 million despite that, so we do have quite a bit of a cushion to continue this pattern. Before I move on from this slide, which has a lot of information, are there any questions about this? All right, thank you. So here's what we plan to be working on in 2022. We're continuing to pursue redevelopment projects, especially in the town center area. In the upper right-hand corner, that image is of the proposed sand company's development, which you discussed and reviewed in June of this year. And that is currently at the state for consideration of low-income housing tax credits. And if that is funded by the state, then construction is anticipated in 2022. We also continue to work on continuing and expanding our branding and beautification efforts, and continue to try to sell some of our remaining EDA properties. There's a reason we haven't sold them yet, which is they all have various unique challenges. Some have some environmental issues, others are small and oddly shaped lots, and everything in between. So, but we continue to work on that. And we also continue to fund part of the Home Improvement Grant Program, which is a subject for the next item on your agenda tonight. So with that, we would ask you to adopt the resolution with the preliminary or proposed 2022 EDA budget and HRA property tax levy. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay. Any questions or discussion? All right, ready to, I'm looking for a motion. Nancy?
Hi, we'll make a motion to adopt the proposed 2022 EDA budget and HRA tax levy.
All right, and Jim?
I'll second that.
Seconding, all right. Let's vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Okay, now on to item number 5. Consider authorizing home improvement program changes effective January 1st, 2022. And John again.
Thank you again, Madam President. I want to start off, we did talk about this a little bit on August 17th, but that was a very long meeting, and there's a lot to think about, a lot of numbers to process, and so I think I've tried to first of all, we'll have more time tonight, but also try to frame it in different options that you have, and you can kind of mix and match. But the bottom line is the program, if you remember a few years ago, the grants were not, the amount of grants that we were giving out every year were not approaching the budgeted amount. And I remember saying at that point, you know, at some point, if the program continues to become more popular, we might start to run into a problem where there were just too many grants. It's too popular, and we have to figure out ways to kind of ratchet the program back a little bit. Well, we are now at that point. In just the first half of 2021, the number of grants and the grant expenditures have been way ahead of what we anticipated in our budget. And while we do have sufficient TIF and EDA fund balances to kind of get through any transition period, we are at the point now where we need to change the program parameters to try to reduce the expenditures to a more sustainable basis, to kind of have them roughly approximate the tax increment district revenue that we are receiving. So there are two ways to do that. One is to reduce the maximum grant amount, which is currently $10,000, to some lower number, and the two options are at $8,000 and $6,000. That's the maximum grant any property can receive in a calendar year. Now, if we do that, Center for Energy and the Environment, who administers this program for us with a 15% administrative fee, would require us to increase the minimum project requirement. And the reason for that is they basically make money on the big grants because that 15% fee more than covers the cost of administering the grant, each grant. But for the really small projects, they lose money. In other words, it costs about the same to administer one of these, whether it's a $10,000 grant or a $400 grant. It still costs well over, I mean, more than the 15% fee they get for a small grant, but less than the 15% fee they get for a big grant. And so they would need us to raise the minimum project amount to kind of weed out some of those smaller grants where they lose money, because they're going to not make as much money with the really big grants. And so I used a spreadsheet to kind of calculate how would we compensate. And the lower we place the maximum grant threshold, so if, for example, if we go from 10,000 to 8,000, we don't need to raise the minimum project as much because they're not giving up as much of those admin fees at those higher grant numbers. If we lower it to 6,000, then we have to bring the minimum project up in order to kind of weed out even more of the smaller projects to make up, so that basically they're doing, the revenue per grant overall is roughly the same. In other words, so they're not taking a loss for our problem, I guess, for lack of a better word. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is reducing the household income thresholds. To qualify for this program currently, households have to be at or below 110% of Twin Cities median area metro income. So, looking at the first question, the maximum grant and minimum project options, option A would be we would reduce the maximum grant to $6,000 and we increase the minimum project to $4,000. And the impact of that would be to reduce our expenditures by about $79,000 a year and have about 8 fewer projects per year. Option B would be a little less of a dramatic change. We would decrease the maximum grant to $8,000 and increase the maximum project to $3,000. And that would reduce our annual expenditures by about $35,000 and result in 4 fewer projects per year. So those are, they're kind of, it's sort of like a combination you'll need to pick tonight. You'll need to pick one of these two options, and then on the next slide, one of those 3 options on the income side. So before I move on to the income side, are there any questions about option A and option B?
Therese. Go ahead, Therese.
How many grants are distributed each year?
So if we annualize the figures from the first half of 2021, it's 138 at that pace.
Is that typical, so 260 or so?
No, 138 would be, the actual number is half that for the 6 months. So
Oh,
I
okay,
doubled that to
okay.
get to the 138. So that would be an annual estimate based on the current pace of the last 6 months. So 138 per year.
And John?
Okay.
Oh, are you?
I'm done.
Any more?
Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
And then the type of projects that we see in this case, mostly like, I think like the main line replacement, for instance, I think they're quite expensive projects where the homeowner has to open up the road, for instance, so it's considerable cost involved.
Yeah, the sanitary sewer.
Sanitary sewer,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So those, we are more generous, we have a 20% grant. 20% of the project cost is the standard for the program. But for sanitary sewer lining or repair replacement projects, we go to 40% as an incentive for people to do that. We especially like it when people do that as part of one of our utility reconstruction projects, because we really want to, it's not just good for the homeowner, it's good for us because it helps reduce infiltration and inflow into the sanitary sewer system. But it's actually available to anyone in the city at any time during the year, not just as part of our utility projects. So they can do it if they have a failing sewer anywhere in the city. They can take advantage of that 40% grant. And those costs are almost always over the $3,000 or the $4,000 new project minimum that we're proposing. So with either of these options, we would not expect to exclude many, if any, of those sewer lining projects.
But lastly, but typically those projects are very expensive. They're like in the $10,000 range and then some, right? I think they're pretty expensive because the road may have to be opened up or whatever. Oh, yeah,
If they're not part of a utility project?
right. Exactly.
If they have to go out to dig up the street, but with lining, they don't necessarily have to do that like they used to. So lining itself, though, can be very expensive. Again, that's usually 5,000-ish,
Okay.
something like that. So it's become more expensive in recent years, I think, but I don't think it's that common anymore for people to actually dig up the street.
Okay.
Because lining is becoming much more popular.
Lastly, but typically seniors are the ones that tend to, rely on this type of program to make repairs on their home, correct?
That I don't know. We don't collect age data of the recipients. One of the things to think about when the next slide, when you're looking at the income, the household income, is that well, actually, I'll just wait till we get to that slide so you can see it on the screen. But we can make some assumptions about some of the smaller households that they perhaps are more likely to be seniors, but we really don't have data on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any more? Anything else? All right, go ahead, John.
So on the income side, on the left-hand side, you see the current income limits based on household size. Option 1 is one that was brought up at the meeting on August 17th. That's just to keep it the same percentage, 100% of Twin Cities area median income instead of 110 for all household sizes. So you can see what those numbers look like in the second column. That would reduce expenditures by about 35,000 and reduce the number of projects by about 12. Option 2, and I've got these in order of least expenditure reduction to greatest expenditure reduction, okay? Option 2, which would keep the 110% income limit for households of 3 or more, but reduce it to 100% for 2-person households and 90% for 1-person households. That would reduce the expenditures by about $57,000 a year and reduce the number of projects by about 18. And then finally, option 3 would be to set the limits at 80% for 1-person households, 90% for 2-person households, and 100% for 3 or more person households. And you can see those numbers in terms of the income levels. That would reduce expenditures by about $97,000 a year and reduce the number of projects by about 30 per year. So, getting to the question about seniors, they tend to be smaller households, but they also tend to have lower incomes. And so one of the things that's kind of stood out to me is looking at these income numbers is that it seems that a single working person making $75,000 a year is in a better, so they would qualify under the current program, 75, 80,000, right? That they are in a better place to be able to afford home improvements than a family of 4 making $115,000 a year. And it just seemed like maybe that's why options 2 and 3 have lower percentage limits in terms of percentage of regional median income to qualify, with the idea being that people who are on fixed incomes, limited incomes, seniors typically, their incomes usually are lower anyway because, not always, but often lower than working age people of the same size household, right? Because they're not earning money from a job, they're relying on pensions or Social Security, and they don't have as many options. So that's the rationale, in case you're wondering, why would we think about having a lower percentage income threshold for smaller households? That's kind of the reason, is that, that seniors tend to have lower incomes at smaller household sizes, and then families tend to be more financially stressed, even at higher income percentage levels. Now, that's options 2 or 3. If you're not comfortable with that approach and would like to keep with the current system of having the same income percentage for all household sizes, then option 1 is something to consider. It doesn't get us as much in terms of expenditure reduction because frankly, I've been surprised at how many projects are for relatively small households with relatively high incomes. And we wouldn't, by just bringing those down, the small households from 110 to 100% of AMI, that doesn't actually exclude that many people or that many households. So again, it's more of a philosophical question, right? Do you think the percentage should be different for smaller households, should be lower for smaller households than larger households, or not? And that is something that I would hope that you would all have a discussion about tonight in considering these options. So before I move on for that, I think that might be a good stopping point to see if there is any discussion about that kind of philosophical question.
All right. Any discussion? No?
Where did,
Jim?
yeah, where did,
You're good.
where did this graduated percentage come from? Did you just come up with it yourself, or is it done elsewhere?
You mean the 90, 100, 110? Yeah, I picked something that seemed sort of logical, I guess, and then I figured out what the income numbers would look like, so you can get a sense of, okay, for a single person, this would be the income limit under that scenario, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
John?
I'm sorry.
Oh, no,
I'm
you're
going the wrong
good.
way.
Go for it.
Well, I mean, I think option 3, if we're talking about, home ownership, I think option 3 would probably be a bit extreme for me. Knowing from looking at home ownership, typically on average, you need to have an income of about $65,000 to be able to adequately be able to afford a home. And so option 2 would probably be the bare minimum that I'd feel comfortable with. Since we're just stepping it down 1 year, I would like to try option 1 for 1 year and see how that works out, how that works with our current financial situation, and then maybe look at option 2 if we need to, but that's just my opinion, so.
Jim?
Did the option 2, did those numbers change, or was that the exact number ratio we had when we talked about it last time?
I think that's the option that I had presented on August 17th, if I recall correctly. I think so.
Keep going, yeah.
Option 3, kind of to John's point on that low number, could we go 90, 100 and just get rid of that low number?
Sure, so like 90% for one-person household and then 100% for everyone 2 or more?
Yeah.
We could certainly do that.
And instead of, so it would be kind of like option 2 except without the 110,
Without the 110 and.
without the 90
and
or
it has
80.
It has a higher
Okay.
low.
Right, so well, I'm going to call that option 4. So for one-person household, this here, 66,150 would be the maximum household income for a one-person household. And then for all the others would be the option 1, the 100%. So 84,000 for a two-person household, 94,500 for a three-person, and so forth. Is that what you're suggesting? That is certainly an option that you could put into a motion for consideration later. So it would be 90-100. We can call that option 4.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Um,
John, go ahead.
Then what about option A or option B?
Yeah.
Again, I think that a lot of these grants are for issues that happen in the home that are very expensive, and so therefore, if we're going to look at doing a decrease, I'd be more inclined to go with option B as opposed to option A. So, and especially if we think that it's seniors who are applying to this program. So, given like, you know, just we're all rationale.
Okay, go ahead, John.
You know, that is something that we discussed at a staff level about, you know, if there's uncertainty about whether you want to make such radical changes to the program, you could always do something that's a little less of a step down and try it and see what happens. Maybe the first 6 months of 2021 was an anomaly. Maybe it has to do with people doing projects because of COVID, or who knows what. I mean, there is of course randomness, right, in the real world. So it may be that the program usage declines on its own. So a more modest change, as some of you have suggested, both on the income side and on of these two options, A and B, that are on your screen now, B being the more modest one. There is a certain logic to doing that first, if you're not comfortable with making the larger adjustments that are in the staff recommendation. So our recommendation does have a caveat that it certainly isn't the only way to go, and we do have fund balances that can carry the program a while longer to see if the problem continues unabated, and then we can revisit this in a year or two.
All right. Any other discussion? Jim?
Yeah, you know, I think incremental is okay. I don't have any problem or heartburn with that. When we look at which would I prefer, option A, but I understand the impact of it, you know, in 1 year is fairly large. At the end of the day, when we get to the end of our money, either we have to come up to what we're accustomed to providing for the public from some other source, or get rid of it. You know, I guess I would look at if we went longer at lower levels, and we got to a decision point down the road that it would be less dramatic regardless of which way we went, because we're used to funding at a lower level, whether we have to come up with another source, or if we have to come up with, or if we got rid of it, there would be less impact. You know, so kind of looking at it from both sides, just kind of thinking out a little bit.
All right. So we're looking for a motion on this right now, then?
Yes, so I'm going to skip by the two staff recommendations because it sounds like that's not something you don't want to go there quite yet. So I'm going to move on to, I'd like to say a couple things about a couple other things that need to be included in the motion. I think it's in the at the end of the staff report. We do need to increase the current contract budget significantly because of the high rate of expenditure in the first 6 months of this year and going into the second part of this year. And it will be some time before any changes you adopt will start to reduce the expenditure rate. So we've estimated the need at $462,000 instead of $308,000. And so that would be one of the things that would be included in your motion tonight. Again, we have adequate fund balances to cover that. And the alternative is not desirable. That's where basically, as soon as the money's obligated, we shut the program down until July 1st of 2022, when the next contract takes effect. And that means people who are trying to plan, if you've ever done a home improvement project, you know it's months just to kind of plan it, get your finances together, figure out what you're going to do, get bids. You know, having it go on hiatus for 6-7 months would be very unworkable for people, again, as they try to do their projects. And so we would not recommend that approach, since we have adequate fund balances to increase the expenditure for this transition.
Jim?
Is that done? Are you done with the report? Sorry.
There's another item on the slide, but I can, if you have a question on that, I can
Nope,
certainly
go ahead.
stop. Okay. And then we also would like to eliminate the fix-up fund interest subsidy. The program has basically been made irrelevant because the state's interest rate on the program without the city's interest subsidy, their interest rate is actually lower than our program was with the subsidy, and so there's really no reason for it. And one of the things that program never seemed to have quite the popularity of the grants. And so our suggestion is, let's just eliminate that program for good and focus on the grant program. That would be our one program. It's very popular. It's fairly easy for people to understand. And it would keep things simple and not have two programs when really we just could focus on the one. So that's all on that slide for me.
Okay. Jim, go ahead.
We ready for a motion?
Yeah, so we make the motion with the options that, is option 4 a viable option right now then?
Yeah. I'll make.
Oh, go ahead, yes, Jim.
I'd like to make a motion to authorize the amendment in the current home improvement program contract with Center for Energy and Environmental as follows: maximum grant and minimum grant, option B, which is the 8,000 and 3,000, and the maximum household income option of 4, which would be the 90-100 option, which is a combination between year one, or the option 2 for 66,150, and then back over to under option 1 for number 2 would follow the rest of that. So if someone's following along, they can see those numbers again. And to increase the current contract budget from $308,079 to $462,000. So that would be the increase there, and also to eliminate the fix-up fund interest subsidy. That's a lot in
Nancy,
one motion.
that is a lot.
I get the easy one.
Yeah.
I second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passes, excellent. And item number 6 is other business. Any other business? No other business. Looking for adjournment. John?
So moved.
And Jim, second.
Second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?